Hello, everyone. This is Londa Nwadike. I'm the Extension Consumer Food Safety Specialist for both the University of Missouri and Kansas State University. And today I'm going to talk about food safety regulations for farmers markets in Kansas. So these regulations are specifically for people selling at farmers markets in Kansas. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the updated publication that's available that's shown here at the bottom of the screen. The publication, we actually started it 4 years ago, or 3 years ago, I guess, and then we've just been updating it every year. So as we get new questions, then we update it. And so I'll talk about that publication. I'll talk a little bit about regulations for selling at farmers markets and just how what needs a license, what doesn't need a license, what you can make at home, and what you have to make in an inspected kitchen, which would not be a regular home kitchen. I'm going to talk specifically about pepper jelly and testing of products because I know that's a question for many people. So we're going to also cover that. And then I'll talk briefly about Produce Safety and Food Safety Modernization Act for Produce Safety update as well. So first of all, why is food safety important and why are we even talking about this today? I grew up on a farm in South Dakota myself. We raised corn and soybeans, had beef cattle and sheep and pigs and so on. We always had a big vegetable garden just for our own use. But I know that farmers are not trying to make anybody sick, and farmers are not, anybody making food is definitely aware that they're going to be feeding it to people. So I know that people are already doing food safety, a lot of good food safety practices. But we just want to make sure that we're aware of some practices and just to make sure that we are really recognizant of the difference between, making something for your own consumption versus when you're selling it. So if you're selling it, there's some extra things to be thinking about. It's, obviously we want to provide our consumers with the products that are as safe as possible. That's kind of a given. But it also can be a way that, you as a farmer's market vendor can just assure the customers that, the quality of the product, that their safety, their health is important to you as a vendor. And it just is a way that you can, as a vendor, you can help, communicate with your customers talking about your food safety practices and that, you want to produce as safe a product as possible for them. So kind of can be a marketing perspective. Unfortunately, in today's society, if somebody gets sick, they could sue anyone that's involved, the farmer's market, they could sue the vendor, they could sue, whoever they think might be involved in that. And so, you really have to protect yourself and try to limit your liability as much as possible, just by doing things as safely as possible. That can really help to reduce your liability, just giving that professional image that a customer won't think, oh, I'm sure it was their cheese or their tomatoes that made me sick. You just want to present that professional image so they won't even suspect, that it was your food that might have made them sick. So this publication that I mentioned, the URL is available here, is listed here, so you can see the long URL. Otherwise, you can also probably go to the K-State ksu.edu website and just go to the search box and type MF3138, and the publication will come up, or you can probably type in food safety for farmers markets or something and find the publication. But the publication, page 1 is kind of an overview of what foods are required licenses, which ones don't, what the license needed, what are the licenses needed, etc. Some basic label requirements are listed at the beginning. And then we go into more detail on, just general food safety practices, selling fresh produce, how to do sampling, how to do food demos, then how to sell prepared foods and baked goods. Just more detail on all these things that are listed in the tables. Another important page I want to draw your attention to is page 15 of that publication that lists key contacts. So if you have questions about, accepting Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program vouchers, there's the list of key contacts who to talk to. If you have a question about getting your scale certified, who do you talk to? So it lists out a lot of just different things related to selling at farmers markets, not all necessarily food safety related. It just tells you who to talk to in Kansas. So now we're going to focus on what regulations do you need to follow. So in Kansas, this is a lot easier than in the Missouri side of my job, because in Kansas, the Kansas Department of Ag regulates all food product sales across the state. So no matter what county you're in or city you're in, the regulations are going to be the same, and it's going to be the same regulator throughout the state, the Kansas Department of Ag. So this particular publication that I've showed you here, we call it, farmers market vendors, and we've talked about the farmers market guide a lot. But actually, this publication covers all foods sold directly to consumers. So anytime you're selling, where you as the person who produced the food can see the person who's going to be eating it, or their family, or maybe they're giving it away as a gift, but that final consumer, if you can see them, that's considered a direct consumer sale. So this also includes if you're at a fair, or a store has a special event, they want to have some vendors sell things, fundraisers, craft shows, on-farm sales, so like a farm stand, a CSA, even generally speaking, products sold online are also included in this. So all direct-to-consumer sale regulations are included in this publication. If you're selling through a grocery store or through a wholesaler, it's going to be different regulations than listed here. But so this one just deals with the direct-to-consumer regulations. Let me see. So if you're selling to other states, if you are selling across state lines, make sure that you've checked what the regulations are in that state, and then also you have to follow the federal regulations, which would be FDA or USDA, depending on what product you're selling. And just a note too, that individual farmers markets could have stricter requirements. So if you're selling to, if you're selling at a particular farmers market, maybe one of the larger ones in the state, sometimes they have stricter requirements. And so, so you'll want to check for sure with them to see, if they have stricter requirements. So a farmers market, cannot have less strict requirements than the regulatory requirements, but they can be stricter. It's their right to have stricter requirements. So I'm going to start by listing out some of the foods that are not allowed to be sold at a farmer's market, of course, unless you have the proper licensing. But the key here is the home canned or homemade issue, because these foods here have to be inspected to be sold. They have to be, have a license and be inspected. So that means that you have to use a kitchen that's not your regular home kitchen for doing them. So you could use, if you have a kitchen in your basement, or if you want to use, maybe check with your local church or something like that, or the VFW, Senior Citizen Center, you can check with them, but you cannot do this in your regular home kitchen. So home canned pickles, meats, vegetables, sauerkraut, you need a license to sell pickles, meats, vegetables, sauerkraut. So you need to do that in a commercial kitchen, like an inspectable kitchen. So can't be home canned. Sorry, baby's coughing. Sorry. So if you're selling things like cream pies or meringue pies, custards, cheesecakes, etc., those are baked goods that need temperature control for safety. They need to be refrigerated for safety. So that means you cannot bake them in your normal home kitchen. They need to be inspected. They need to be made under a license, so they would need to be done in a kitchen that's not your normal home kitchen. So if you're just selling, just cookies or bread, things that don't need temperature control for safety, you can do those at home, selling direct to consumer. If you're selling homemade dairy products, such as, making your own yogurt and you're selling that, that's not allowed. You have to have a license to sell any sort of dairy products. So again, you can't do that in your normal home kitchen. Meat also has to be inspected to be sold. So we'll talk about poultry in a minute, but meat does need to be inspected to be sold in Kansas. So now I'm going to talk about the foods that are allowed. to be sold without a license. So you do not need any licensing for these. So you can do them in your normal home kitchen. And I'm going to start by listing any products that were modified from 2016, the 2016 publication. Just because something was added to the publication doesn't necessarily mean that the law changed or the rule changed. It's just that maybe we hadn't been asked that question before, and so we didn't have it listed in the publication. So every year, as we get questions from people, if there's a product that we just hadn't thought of listing in the publication yet, we'll add it to the list if it needs a license or it doesn't need a license. So every year we try to keep adding new things to make sure that it's as up to date as possible. So these are things that were newly listed in 2017. So again, doesn't mean that the regulation changed necessarily, but just these things were things that we hadn't thought about or hadn't listed in 2016. So the first one, and then after this, I'll talk about just other things that were listed previously as well. So the first thing we'll talk about is microgreens and shoots. So microgreens are similar to a sprout, but it's not the full plant like a sprout. So with a sprout, it's a little bit younger than a microgreen or a shoot. And the sprout, you're getting the whole root system and everything. But with the microgreen, generally you're harvesting, at this above the soil, cutting them off, and then selling them. So microgreens and shoots that if you're not cutting them beyond normal harvesting, so you can harvest them with a knife or with a scissor, you're cutting them to harvest, but again, that's just above the soil there. You don't need a license for that. But if you start to chop them, then you do need a license for that. So again, microgreens and shoots, you do not need a license to sell those at this point, at the time of this recording in April of 2017. Cut tomatoes, cut melons, cut leafy greens. Again, this is, chopped maybe tomatoes, chopped melon, chopped leafy greens. Anything that's cut beyond normal harvesting, again, those products do require a license to be sold. However, any other cut produce, like cut carrots or cut broccoli, like you do not need a license to sell cut carrots or cut broccoli, or cut herbs as well. So that's a clarification that the tomatoes, melons, and leafy greens, for cutting those are higher risk. So those you do need a license to sell when they're chopped. But if it's anything else, chopped strawberries, they do not require a license to be sold. Poultry, if you're selling less than 20,000 birds per year, you do not need a license, and do not need inspection to sell poultry direct to consumer. But there is, if you're selling, I believe it's less than 5,000 birds per year, you don't even have to register that exemption. But if you're selling between 5,000 and 20,000 birds per year, you do need to register that exemption that you're not selling under inspection, but just registering that. So the Kansas Department of Ag, Meats and Poultry Department will have more information on that. So also the next one is spices. So if you're selling bulk spices or small quantities of spices, licensing is not required for those either. So you can sell those without a license. Herb flavored or herb infused vinegars, you do not need a license to sell those. Vinegars are low pH, high in acid, so they're considered to be safer. So you can include, tarragon or rosemary or thyme or whatever in that vinegar without a license. Now, as I mentioned, so these were ones that were changed or modified from the previous year's publication. Now I'm going to go into ones that were listed in the 2016 publication as well, but are ones, again, that do not need a license to be sold. You do not need to label them as being homemade, but you can license them as being homemade, label them as being homemade. I know on the Missouri side, you are required to, if you're selling something that was not inspected in your home kitchen, you are required to may have a statement on the label saying it's, you know, produced in a home kitchen. That is not a requirement in Kansas, but again, you can label them as being homemade if you'd like to. So as I mentioned, just plain cookies, you know, chocolate chip cookies, just bread, cakes that do not require refrigeration for safety. You can sell those without any licensing. Again, once you get into the cheesecakes, then you do need to have licensing, but straight across home baked goods do not need licensing. Intact salad greens, now this would be greens that have not been chopped. So this is just the greens that again, you can cut them, but just at the soil line, you know, above the soil line to harvest them. That's okay, you don't need a license to sell that. But once you start chopping them, finely chopping your lettuce or spinach, then you do need a license to do that. So again, just intact salad greens cut just for normal harvesting, you don't need a license for. If you're selling dry baking mixes, so just the flour and the sugar and those sort of the dry ingredients as a bread mix or a brownie mix or whatever, you do not need a license to sell those as well. Nuts do not require a license, whether they're shelled or still in the shell. No license required to sell nuts in Kansas, direct to consumer. Honey does not require a license to be sold direct to consumer. Also, eggs, you're not required to have a license to sell direct to consumer. However, or I should say eggs if you have less than 50 hens. Once you have more than 50 hens, there is some licensing requirements. But if you have less than 50 hens, there's no licensing requirements for selling eggs. However, we still would recommend that you use good food safety practices, such as keeping them below 45 degrees and you know, making sure that the cartons are clean and crossing out if you're using old cartons from, you know, that you bought at the store, crossing out the name that was previously on there is another important one. Some more foods that do not require licensing that we've had listed in the past. Home canned fruit jams and jellies do not require licensing, but just some notes on this. This is if you're selling the regular, like high sugar fruit jams and jellies. So once you start selling reduced sugar jams and jellies or no sugar jams and jellies, those do require licensing to be sold. So also if you're selling something that has pepper flavored vinegar or pepper powder in it, so like a pepper jam and jelly, if it's made with pepper powder. And I also learned if something has had pepper juice, pepper juice doesn't need to be sent for testing, sorry. So if pepper flavored vinegar, pepper powder, small amounts of pepper powder, those types of pepper jellies you do not need a license for. If you're selling a pepper jelly that has chunks of pepper in it, that you do need to send for testing. I'll talk about that later. So again, just if you're selling strawberry jam, normal sugar, you don't need a license for that. If you sell reduced sugar or no sugar strawberry jam, then you do need to have a license. And again, we'll talk more about that in a minute. If you're selling things like canned fruits, so canned applesauce, canned peaches, those you do not need a license for. So they're regularly naturally high in acid, so they're considered safer. Homemade hard candies, you don't need a license for. Something like chocolates, you do need to send in for testing, but just like a cinnamon disc or something, you don't need a license for. If you're selling cultivated whole mushrooms, you do not need a license. So if it's like shiitakes, whether they're fresh or dry, you don't need a license for that. I'll talk about morels in a future slide. If you're selling fish or seafood that are whole, again, this is not, they haven't been de-gutted, but they're whole on ice, you do not need a license for that. If you're selling foods that people are going to be consuming, you know, immediately, like if it's a piece of pizza or a burger or something that it's intended for people to eat that there at the market, if you're doing that less than 6 times per year, you do not need a license. If you're doing that as a for-profit entity, you know, trying to make some money, if you're doing that less than 6 times per year, you do not need a license. Once you get over that 6 times per year, if you're a for-profit entity, you do need a license. You still need to make sure that you're following good sanitation and hygiene requirements, such as having a hand washing station available, but you do not need to have a license for that. If it's a community group, such as a Boy Scout troop or 4-H club or school group, church group, that's sort of a group that's trying to sell, some sort of ready-to-eat foods, again, pizzas, beer rocks, whatever it is. If it's for fundraising purposes, you do not need a license regardless of how many times a year you do it. Again, you still need to follow those sanitation and hygiene requirements, having the hand wash station available, making sure that you can wash dishes, and sanitize them, that sort of thing. But again, if it's a community group for fundraising purposes, you don't need a license no matter how many times you're doing it. A few more things that don't need a license: homemade dried pasta, vanilla extract, lard was something that you do not need a license if selling directly to consumer. Pepper vinegar, if you're making a pepper vinegar, again, the vinegar is really acidic, so we don't need it's lower in risk, so you don't need a license. Things like flour, cornmeal popcorn, those don't need a license for. Fruit leathers, they don't require a license either. They're pretty dry, so lower in risk. Okay, now I'm going to shift over to things that do need a license. So again, these are things that you could not do in your regular home kitchen because you need a license. It has to be an inspectable space. So it would have to be a place that it's not your regular home kitchen, because your regular home kitchen is not an inspectable space. Again, it could be a kitchen in your basement. That's not your regular home kitchen, or in the garage, or the local senior citizen center or whatever. But these are things that do require licensing. This first slide again is going to be just modifications from the publication in 2016, and then after that I'll just list other products that were previously listed in the publication in the years past. But first I'm just going to talk about the ones that have changed. So things that we've added this year, again, this is just because we were asked, not that the regulatory status changed, but just that we added to the publication this year. Things like dough, cookie dough, pizza dough, whether it's refrigerated or frozen, you do need a license. Those are considered higher risk products. Poultry, again, if you're selling more than 20,000 birds per year, you do need a license for that. Less than 20,000 birds per year for poultry, you do not need a license to sell direct to consumer. I've already mentioned this: cut melons, cut tomatoes, cut leafy greens, and again, I should probably say chopped melons, chopped tomatoes, chopped leafy greens that are cut beyond normal harvesting, whether they're fresh or dried. You do need a license to sell those because they're considered higher risk. Sprouts does require a license. Again, microgreens and shoots do not, but sprouts does. Roasted vegetables require a license. And then things like if you have an infused oil, so not a vinegar, but an oil, or like a garlic and oil, or tarragon and oil, those sort of things you do need a license because the oil is a higher risk type of product. If you're selling animal feed and treats, like pet treats, dog treats, dog biscuits, or whatever, you do need a license to sell that as well, and that's from the Kansas Department of Ag Feed Division, actually. Okay, so these again are things that do require licensing, and these were listed in the publication in years past as well, just to reiterate them. And just a note too that it doesn't matter how many times per year you sell these things, whether it's once a year, you still need a license. So if you just have one sale a year or something of these particular products, you still need a license. So dairy products, you do need to have a license to sell them. We don't want to make sure that those are safe. Potentially hazardous baked products such as cheesecakes, cream-filled cupcakes, you do need to have a license to sell those. Raw meat, again, meat must be slaughtered under under inspection. This is different again than poultry, but any meat does need to have a license to be sold direct to consumer. Ready to eat meat also requires a license. Cleaned fish and seafood requires a license. Again, if it's not clean, then you don't need a license. You're selling things like refrigerated salsa, refrigerated pesto, that requires a license. It's a higher risk product. And this is not, again, it's just refrigerated, not canned. I'll talk about canned salsa later. Wild mushrooms, so like morels, someone in the chain has to have gone to a class or be able to prove that they have the credentials to know what a safe morel is. So it doesn't have to necessarily be the person selling them, but somebody at some point has to make sure that they've inspected those morels, that they're safe to eat. And we can provide more information on that if you have questions on that. Naturally fermented canned foods such as sauerkraut, you do need to have a license to sell those, to sell that sort of canned food. Again, we're not expecting people are going to eat sauerkraut right there at the market. Maybe they will, but if you're selling a can of sauerkraut, we're expecting they're taking it home. But you do need a license to sell sauerkraut because it's a naturally fermented food. We want to make sure that it's done correctly and safely. Some more foods that are allowed, again, with licensing. If you're selling something like salsa, pickles, hot sauce, canned tomatoes even. Well, actually, salsa I'm going to take off the list, sorry. Let's say pickles, hot sauce, canned tomatoes. Those are considered acidified foods. Again, if they're shelf stable, we have to have a license. If you're selling stuff like canned vegetables, canned meat, shelf-stable cake or bread in a jar, those things are considered low-acid canned foods. They're higher risk. You do need a license. You need to have the recipe approved, and you need to also have attended, or somebody that's in the facility when you're making it has to have attended Better Process Control School. Again, we can provide more information on that, but it's generally about $400 or a little more to attend Better Process Control School. You can do it online also, but we really want to make sure that that's safe. So then, I already kind of mentioned this before, but if you're a for-profit entity selling more than 6 times per year, direct to consumer, things like, things for immediate consumption, so like a pizza or grilled hamburgers that you're planning to eat there at the market, if you're doing that more than 6 times a year, you do need a license for that. Alcoholic beverages, something that has more than 0.5% alcohol, so beer and wine would fall into that, and some kombucha drinks might also have that much alcohol in them as well. Those do need licensing through the Department of Revenue because they're in charge of alcohol sales and taxing and so on. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about foods that require to be tested first. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about why we do require that some foods have testing first. So we want to make sure that, well, my friends at the Kansas Department of Ag, Adam Inman, he said that fair and simple rarely meet. And, they try to draw a line in the sand saying these products are higher risk, these products are lower risk, and what products actually require licensing should be the ones that are higher risk. So, if we want to try to be really fair about what products are higher risk, which ones are lower risk, every product would have to be evaluated separately, but that's not very simple. But if we wanted to have simple regulations, we would just say everything needs a license. But, not everything is the same level of risk. So, that's why we have some foods to be tested, because we want to find out, for that particular formulation of salsa or a pepper jelly, is it how high of risk is it? Does it need a license or not? So that's why we have some foods. That's why we recommend that some foods get tested first, so that we can find out, how high of risk is it? Does it need a license to make sure that it's safe, or is it something that's lower risk? We don't have to have a license to sell that product. So because everybody makes pepper jelly a little bit differently. Everybody might make salsa a little bit differently. So we want to make sure that we're evaluating that particular product to see if it's going to be safe or not. So for testing, you can send it to Fadi Aramuni's lab at K-State in Manhattan, the Kansas Value-Added Foods Lab. You can see the URL there. And he has more information on that website. There's a page there that talks about where to send it to, the address to send it to, and so on. It also talks about what tests can be done and so on. My understanding is that if if you're a farmer's market vendor, if you're just selling at farmers markets and you need this testing done, the Kansas Department of Ag has helped offset the costs of that sort of testing with Dr. Aramoni's lab, so you can get those products tested for free. If you're selling, through a grocery store or through a wholesaler, then you would need to pay for that. But it's very generous that farmers market vendors don't have to pay for getting those sort of products tested. So I have the pH scale listed on here. So some of the things, sometimes the characteristics that we're looking at is the pH to see how acidic or how basic, not acidic that product is. Things that are more acidic are going to be naturally safer. So things that are not as acidic are going to be less safe. So that's why things like vinegars are safer. Tomatoes are kind of right on the border of 4.6 is the pH cutoff for Clostridium botulinum, which is a concern in canned foods. So things that are like canned meat, that's why that's a higher risk product, or canned vegetables. So we just want to make sure the products are sold are as safe as possible. So the things that do require testing before, that do require testing to determine if they need a license or not. Again, when you send it in for testing, Dr. Aramoni might say, you don't need a license for this, it's safe, you don't need a license. Or he might say, this product is a little bit higher risk, you do need to have a license for it. So it doesn't, so if you find out that one of the products that you're selling requires testing, it doesn't mean, oh, it automatically needs a license. It might need a license, it might not, we're not sure. So it just needs to be tested first to find out. Pepper jams and jellies is one that I mentioned. Again, that's if it has chunks of pepper in it. Pepper is lower acid, it's higher in pH. So we want to make sure that the water activity, that's not too much moisture, that the water is bound up by sugar or salt, to make sure that there's less water there for microorganisms to grow on. Again, low sugar fruit jams and jellies. So if it's a low sugar strawberry jam or a reduced sugar strawberry jam, we want to check those to make sure that it's going to be safe. So pH, water activity, and product formulation. Things like salsa, barbecue sauce, those should be sent in for testing as well. They're going to check the pH. And you don't have to tell the lab what things you want to test for. Just tell them, what the product is and that you want to sell it at a farmer's market, and they'll know what to test it for. Chocolate candies are something that might require refrigeration for safety, so those should be checked as well to make sure that they're going to be safe, that if they need a license or not. Pecan pie is something, we just got that question last year actually. Pecan pie is something that it's quite high in sugar, but also has eggs in it and so on, so we want to make sure that it's safe. So we just want to get some data on what is the water activity level of pecan pie, how risky might that product be. If you're selling something like a cinnamon roll that has a powdered sugar and milk icing, we do want that tested as well to see again what the water activity is. And the water activity is a combination of the moisture content and the sugar and salt content that determines how much moisture is available for microorganisms to grow. So we do want to send those in to get tested to make sure that they're going to be safe and don't need a license, or to see if they need a license or not. So I keep talking about getting a license. So here's some information about how to get a license. You can go to the Kansas Department of Ag website. You can see it's listed there, but again, you can probably do a search for KDA. Food Safety and Lodging is the program under KDA that does the licensing for these food products that we're talking about. Their email address is listed there, and then their phone number is also listed there, so you can contact them to get more information if you do need a license. All right, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about, and I should mention while I'm thinking of it, I just actually had someone mention the other day that if you're selling a pepper jam and jelly that has pepper juice in it, that should also be sent in for testing. because the juicing could change the pH and so on. So that also should be sent in for testing, as well as pepper jam or jelly that's made with like chunks of pepper in it. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about the FSMA produce safety rule. So this is a national or federal regulation from the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, and it's the Food Safety Modernization Act. There's also a processed foods regulation under FSMA, and there's some other rules as well. The produce safety rule is probably one that's the biggest change for people to deal with, for producers to deal with. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So the final rule was the law was signed into law in 2011, and then the final rule was released in November of 2015. So it's relatively recent yet. So we're still kind of figuring out some of the details, and some of the details are still shaking themselves out. This is the first time that there's ever been governmental regulation on the production, harvest, and handling of fruits and vegetables. So again, the focus is on that production side, growing, harvesting, packing, holding. So it's not on the the retail side. That's already covered by other regulations, but it's the first time we've had to regulate produce on the production side. If you're familiar with, with GAPS, Good Agricultural Practices, the requirements of FSMA are similar to GAPS. GAPS is something that buyers might require you to have. GAPS is not a regulatory program. It's just like if you want to sell to certain buyers, like larger grocery stores, multinational grocery stores, they might ask you to be GAPS certified. And so that's something different than FSMA. FSMA is a regulatory requirement. So there are some exemptions from FSMA, which I'm going to talk about now. The big one that a lot of farmers market vendors would likely be exempted by is the first size exemption here. So if you're selling less than $25,000 worth of produce per year, and again, this is produce per year. This isn't all food sales, but just produce. On average, over the last 3 years, you are exempt from FSMA. So a lot of farmers market vendors might fall under that category and would be exempt from FSMA. Again, I'll talk about it in a minute, but we would definitely encourage everyone to become educated on this and improve their produce safety and meet the requirements of the rule, because it's a good idea as a professional, and it's going to help ensure the safest food as possible. But just that you're not going to be subject to potential inspections and so on if you're selling less than $25,000 worth of produce per year. I'll mention this in a minute too, but if your farm is ever linked to a foodborne disease outbreak, then you lose your exemption status. If your produce is rarely consumed raw, so that's things like pumpkin, maybe potatoes. I hear that some people eat potatoes raw, but I think the general population does not eat potatoes raw. So produce that's rarely consumed raw is also not covered by FSMA. FSMA is really targeted at those things like tomatoes, lettuce, cucumbers that are consumed raw, that are not going to have any other kill step before they're consumed. So, like the pumpkin or potatoes, they're going to be cooked before it's eaten. So it's not as much of a risk as things that are not going to be cooked before they're eaten, because that's the last chance we have to control any pathogens that might be there. The next exemption here is a qualified exemption. And it's kind of the local foods exemption. So on average over the last 3 years, if you have more than $500,000 worth of annual food sales, now this is all food, not just produce, but food sales, and the majority of the food is sold directly to a qualified end user. And a qualified end user is if you're selling it direct to consumers, so it'd be like through a farmer's market, or if you're selling to a restaurant within your state, or I believe it's within 275 miles of your farm, then you are exempt. However, you still have some record-keeping requirements, some additional record-keeping requirements, but it's kind of a qualified exemption. So if you don't fall under one of those exemptions, there's a few other ones too that I didn't list just for time, but if you're selling tomatoes to a canner or somebody that's going to be canning the tomatoes, then you would be exempt. But everyone else is covered. But if your farm is ever linked to a foodborne disease outbreak, then you lose your exemption. So you have to meet the requirements of the law if you ever tied to a foodborne disease outbreak. One of the big things of this FSMA produce safety rule is that everyone that's covered by FSMA is required to go to a training, and it has to be a certified training, we'll call it. It's a one-day training. FDA is really emphasizing education and prevention in this regulation, so they really want everyone to get trained. This is a one-time training. You don't have to go every 5 years or anything. It's just one-time training that's required for producers to go to. Even if you're already GAP certified, if you've been to some other training, if you've listened to this presentation or whatever, maybe you're organic certified, you still have to go to the training. So it's a requirement for everyone to go to a training. K-State Extension does plan to start offering these courses in late 2017. Hold on. Hi, I'm actually recording a webinar right now, sorry. Yeah, just have them drop it off, sorry. Thanks, bye. Okay, sorry. Let me see. So we are planning to start offering these courses in late 2017. We did offer one in January of 2017 in St. Joe, Missouri. And we are planning to offer other ones in the upcoming months. So we'll make sure that we get information out to everyone, to the local extension offices and through other channels to make sure that people know about that upcoming training. We do have funding to help pay farmer costs to attend the trainings. So we're going to try to keep it as low cost as possible. So more information will be available on that soon. Oops. So my son decided to join us here, sorry. Just some information about compliance dates. So if you are going to be covered by FSMA, if you're selling more than $500,000 worth of, I believe this is $500,000 worth of food sales, or no, it's produce sales, I believe, sorry. Then the compliance date is January of 2018. If you're a small business, so selling between $250,000 and $500,000 worth of produce, the compliance date is January of 2019. So you have a few more years on that. And then very small businesses between $25,000 and $250,000 worth of sales, you have until 2020, January of 2020. So, and then also there's some water testing requirements, and there will be 2 additional years past those compliance dates for those. So, so there will be some more time to do that water testing that's required. I have a fact sheet available that compares GAP certification and FSMA. That kind of gives just some more information. If you're familiar with GAPs, or familiar with the GAP certification thing, hopefully this fact sheet can kind of give some more information about what the differences are and what the similarities are and so on. It gives more information on FSMA as well, to who's it administered by, and what's going to happen with inspection, or well, we don't know the details of that yet, but what do we know at this point on these things here? K-State does have a produce safety website. The URL is listed here at the top. You can see it up there. So that website has just information like the fact sheet that I just showed, the GAPs, FSMA comparison, and then also and then also just other, a fact sheet that we have on gaps. And then we have information, just produce safety basic information, just some kind of basic information on compost and so on. More information about how to, if you want to write an on-farm food safety plan, has some templates and resources for that, and just other resources as well. That'll be helpful, and produce safety is all listed there. So as I mentioned, we are planning to do some trainings around the state, but we don't have the date set yet, but we're planning on doing them this fall. So just stay tuned. We'll have more information on more of these trainings that'll be available. We're also planning, in addition to doing the FSMA certified training, the one that's required by law, we're planning to have just some general produce safety workshops as well. That'll be held again around the state. So just stay tuned for more information on that. So here's my contact information, and my phone number and email address, and so on. Our K-State Extension Food Safety website is listed there too. If you have other questions, want more information, just feel free to let us know. So, and yeah, I apologize that Joshua, my son, kind of joined us for a little bit, and I got a phone call. Sorry about that. I didn't know what to do when the phone rang. So anyway, hopefully that information was helpful, and you'll feel a little more ready for knowing the farmers market regulations. So thank you very much. I'm going to stop the share, and I'll stop the recording. So have a good day.